Welcome back to Rich Dad Stockcast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're tackling one of the most common, most trusted, and most misunderstood retirement vehicles in America, the 401k. Now, for decades, people have been told that this is the safest, the smartest path to retirement. But what if the very thing millions are relying on has hidden risks almost no one talks about? Today, we're breaking down what 99% of investors don't know about 401ks and why blindly following traditional advice can cost you flexibility, control, and real wealth. Joining me today is Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner, who spent years teaching people how to think beyond a standard retirement script. And before we get into it, go to stockcastbonus.com. Grab your free investing tools if you want to understand your options, not just follow the herd, if you will. This is where clarity starts. Andy, welcome back.
Boy, I'm a little nervous about this one because I've written two books on this. Well, I've written the same book twice, a first edition and a second edition that's about to be published. And, you'll ask me one question and you put a nickel in me and I'll go for an hour. This topic, I've written a lot on this. So you'll have to, be a good steward of the time here because this is something that's so passionate for me and so important to me. If you decide to write a book on it, obviously I have some feelings, very much an evangelist here. Most of the time, Del, I don't care what people do. I have my life, they have theirs, let them do what they want. But there's something about, have you ever just seen an injustice and you just felt you couldn't be a bystander? I saw this. I remember one time, Del, I was at 7-Eleven or something, and I saw a police officer get taken down by a guy who was bigger and stronger than he was. And this guy's spraying mace in the air, and he had a few too many donuts, and not that I hadn't. But I'm seeing this police officer just get beat up by this kid, and there's a crowd of people watching, and immediately I just took off. And that kid saw me coming, and he dumped the officer on his noggin and started running. And I'm not the fastest guy, but I had an angle on him, and I took him down. And next thing you know, you had all these police cars coming because someone said officer in trouble, and I took this kid down. And my wife is like, I hear her screaming, what are you doing? But there's certain times where you see something happening that is just absolutely wrong. And whether it's my place or not to get involved like that, there's certain times where you just got to do something. So that's the passion I have for writing this book. There are things to your topic that people don't know about this system that if they want to participate in it, fine, go participate. But there's things you should know about it before you just blindly go along like sheep and make Wall Street rich. So this will be, this will get me going. This is a topic that gets me going, man.
I feel the passion already coming through, and I can't wait to poke the tiger here so much. That's my personal. I love poking the tiger. I feel it coming. But before the poking happens, stockcastbonus.com, great resources in there. What do we receive when we go there?
It's great stuff. We've been so pleased with the people that have gone there and have found some things. And I don't like to say, oh yeah, go there, it'll be life-changing. Just go there and decide for yourself. Go there, decide for yourself, see what is there, download it, get to know us better, and look at some of the blueprints we have, some of the materials we have, and just see that if, as you look at it, especially the habits that we suggest, if they wouldn't just be life-changing for you, and you be the judge of that. So go to stockcastbonus.com. Free stuff. It's free. So free is a good thing.
Fantastic. I love that. Okay. So big picture 401ks. Why did the 401k become the go-to retirement plan? I mean, we had pensions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even remember pensions. Pensions were great, but how did 401k become the thing that, everyone invests in now?
So let me, that's such a bullseye question. And I know we always usually have a break and a before and after, in halves in our podcast. So maybe this first half, let me talk about that in terms of the history. Like, how did this come to be? Because when you understand that, it will give you pause. And then maybe in the second half, we can talk about some of the more current damage that it does today. But I think that's a great 1-2 punch. I can't read the whole book. That's why I wrote a whole book. In 1974, President Ford was there by default. President Nixon was disgraced and resigned. And it's kind of like Miss America. If any reason that Miss America can't perform her duties, you got that first attendant waiting in the wings. So we have President Ford taking over. And in the 60s, just a few years before, the Studebaker Company had gone bankrupt, and thousands of people lost their pensions. So the unions had a big brouhaha over this, saying, well, gee, we should have government take over this so these people don't get screwed out of their promised pensions when a company goes bankrupt, which is ironically because it was the unions that were saying more, and they're saying, we don't have the money to do this. You're going to bankrupt us. They said, nope, pay us. And he's like, we don't have the money. So they went bankrupt. So the United Auto Workers Union and their contingency started to lobby Congress. And President Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson didn't do much. Nixon said he wasn't a crook, but he was. And finally, in President Ford, it lands on his desk, this thing called ERISA. And it's baloney because of the title. The Affordable Care Act is not affordable. Social Security is not secure. The big, beautiful bill isn't really that big or beautiful, right? Whatever they name it, it's the opposite of what it is.
True.
So look at the title of like President Obama, the Responsible Fathers and Families Act. You know what that is? That gives incentives to deadbeat dads not to be deadbeat dads. That's called duty. You don't legislate that, right? It's actually an act for irresponsible fathers who don't take care of their families act, right? So whether it's Democrat or Republican, the George Bush bill called the Pension Protection Act doesn't protect pension, it kills them. So whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you just look at the title of the bill, you can almost guarantee that it's window dressing. ERISA stands for it's ERISA, the employment. Now I can't remember my own acronym. What's ERISA stand for, Del? I can't believe you have to edit that. ERISA is the Employee Income Security Act. Isn't that what it is? Can't believe I can't remember that anymore. Hang on, I got to Google it so I get it right, so I don't embarrass myself.
We'll cut on this one.
Hang on a second. I have so many acts in my brain. I think it's the Employee Income Security. ERISA stand for. It's called the Employee
Retirement Income Security Act.
I think that's what it is, isn't it? Employee
Retirement Income Security Act.
Employee Retirement Income. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay. So you have this thing called ERISA, called the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, and it doesn't do any of those things. And it created a government entity called the PBGC, the Public Pension Guarantee Corporation, where instead of putting the burden of taxpayers to pay for failed pensions, where if a company like Studebaker went bankrupt, you just have the taxpayers pay the pensions, their taxes. They said, let's tax the companies. And if a corporation offers a pension, they have to pay into this government insurance company to do this. So all of this is going on with ERISA, and President Ford signs this in. So great. And it created some laws that froze some of the rules regarding what you could pay executives and what pensions could be deferred and what couldn't. It just really affected, and some of the laws changed. Some of them got frozen. It was an interesting act. Well, a few years later, in the Carter presidency, Jimmy Carter's presidency was failing. Let's just call it what it is. He's got Iran hostages. He's got massive inflation. He's got energy policy problems. He's got problems all around. So he's trying to do something, and he says, let's do tax reform, or let's reform taxes. Well, whenever you make reform, that gives Republicans and Democrats chances to put their pork and their little special favors into an act. So he's trying to get this tax reform done. And there was a guy named Barbara Conable, who is an upstate New York congressman on the House Ways and Means Committee. So he had some pull on ways and means. What are the ways and what are the means that we're going to pay for things? And he got a call from two of his constituents in New York. One was Xerox and one was Kodak. And they said, "Hey, Conable, Mr. Barber, or Mr. Conable here, Barbara Conable, can you help us tweak a few things? Because we're in a 75% tax bracket back in 74. So if these guys give themselves $100,000 Christmas bonus at the end of the year, they're going to give 75 grand of that to the government right off the top, right out. So they're like, is there any way you could help us with some deferral on this so we can get these bonuses and defer the tax till later?" And he said, "Let me see what I can do." So he hires a young man. These are people you've never heard of. Richard Stenger, who I've interviewed on my Cashflow Academy podcast, by the way. And Richard Stenger was a young lawyer from Temple University. And he just graduated from law school. He was going to go try to be a partner, earn his way to partner somewhere like people do. And one of his professors had contacts in DC and said, "Richard, why don't you go help congressmen write legislation and be one of the lawyers that helps them write law?" He says, "That'd be an interesting career." So he flies out to DC, interviews for the job, and he gets it. And he gets on Barbara Conable's staff. And he says, "I want you to write a piece of legislation with your team on how to help Xerox and Kodak defer these bonuses." And he says, "Sure, I'll do that." So, and when I interviewed him, I about fell out of my chair when he said this. He first of all, it was 800 words. Now think about that. I think the Affordable Care Act is 5,000 pages, not words. It's hundreds of thousands of words. The original 401k section was 800 words, like 832, something like that. And he writes this legislation, and they take it to the Treasury, the IRS, and one other agency that say, look, if we give them a tax deferral, how much money will not be paid in taxes? In other words, how much tax revenue will we lose if we give these big guys a break? And the House Ways and Means, or they came back after all the analysis, and they said this. I couldn't believe this. They said that the 401k would impact the federal revenue of tax collection by less than $1 million. Now think about that for a minute, Del. Less than $1 million in tax savings if they interact that. What that means is they didn't believe anyone was going to use it, because if you interact something of substance, it would be billions of dollars, not millions of dollars. And Richard, I said, "Richard, are you kidding me?" And he said, "Either the reason," this is a quote from him, "either the reason to enact it didn't exist or the numbers were way off. But, we did it anyway." So it gets on the books. 2 years later, so this is about 76 or so, 77, sometime in there. And so in 1978, 401k is put out there. So in 1978, we have this law. So 74 is ERISA, 78 is 401k. There was a consultant named Ted Bennett, who I've interviewed 3 times on my podcast. And Ted Bennett is a sweetheart. Just, he reminds me of my young days where my father was somewhat of a pastor. And my father, we did Bible study all the time. And there's a scripture where it talks about Paul. He says, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel," right? That absolutely personifies Ted Bennett. This guy is a Christian dude who just wears that on his sleeve. He's proud of it. And he's a good, thoroughly good man, really a good man. And I didn't even think he'd take my interview because I wrote a book on how bad 401ks are, but he took the interview. One of the kindest, gentlest gentlemen I've met. And he said, "Andy, I had this client, Cheltenham Bank, who was trying to hire executives to their bank away from other banks. And ERISA had frozen the rules where they could get deferred tax on their bonuses. But if they moved to banks, they wouldn't get the deferral. So this Cheltenham Bank couldn't get top talent because ERISA froze the rules for the old banks, grandfathered them in, but the new ones wouldn't get the tax bonuses. So he was vexed with this problem of how do I get this company a pension or a package that allows them to do tax deferral and hire away good talent. And that was the other part, is when Richard Stenger wrote 401k, there was a line between the top third of earners and the bottom two-thirds of earners that said, if the bottom aren't participating, then the top can't do it. So you have this rich versus poor dynamic that if the poor don't participate, the bank teller, in this case, as the VP, you got to have a bank teller participate and a VP, or all bets are off. So he looks in this section 401k and he says, I think we could use 401k to get the deferral like Xerox and Kraft, but I don't know how to get your bank teller to buy in. Because think about this. Let's say that a rich executive is going to get a $100,000 bonus and he's in a 75% tax bracket at the time. That's 75 grand. Merry Christmas. You get 25. That sucks. So he definitely wants to defer that towards retirement because he's rich. He doesn't need the money anyway. Defer it, right? Don't pay the tax. The bank teller gets a $100 Christmas bonus and they're in a 15% tax bracket. So they're saving $15 and they need the 85 for Christmas money, right? And so the problem is how do you get a bank teller to sign up for a 401k type account and the executive? And so he prays about this. He literally goes on his knees and he begins to pray, how can I solve this problem? And it's no different than really anything else. It's bait. How do you get people to do things? You lure them. Bait, here's a quote, if you want a wiki quote. Andy's wiki quotes. I'm trying to get a few out there. Bait is food that conceals a hook. It's real food. It smells like food. It tastes like food because a night crawler on a hook is real food. That's why it works. And that fish has no chance because it's survival instinct. There's the worm, go get it. The fish has no chance. It's going to eat the worm. Well, we're the same way with money. If I went to a crowded place, some city, and I took $100 bills and just threw them out on the ground, people would go nuts. They'd fight and scratch and, dive on. It'd just be like the fish. So Benna says, you know what? What if we do 2 sales pitches? To the bank teller, we'll say, look, put your money, your bonus deferred in this 401k account. So you won't get your bonus. You can't touch it. It'll be in a retirement account though. And that'll save you $15, but we'll match 25 cents on the dollar. So 25 cents plus 15 cents for every dollar, that's a 40% benefit to you that quick. 40%, that's irresistible. So we'll dangle some real money, some real food in front of you, and it looks big, 40%, right? 40%. Okay, fine. Remember that for our next segment, by the way. That's going to be big. So they go to Cheltenham and they say, now here's the best part. Not everyone will enroll. So the breakage will give you enough people to enroll, enough people won't, to where it'll cost you less than 1% of payroll. So there's a 1% pitch to the corporation, a 40% pitch to the employee. And Cheltenham says, this is brilliant. Why isn't anybody doing this? He said, well, I just came up with it. And they go, we don't want to be trailblazing. We're not going to pioneer this. If no one else is doing it, this sounds scary to us. We don't want to be the first. So Ted goes back to his partner at Johnson Benna Company, says, we'll do it. We'll do it with our own employees. And on January 1st, 1981, the first 401k account was born. And that's why Ted Benna is the father of 401k. Now let's pause here before we see what happens next. It is important for every 401k participant to know that there was never at any time ever a think tank, a brain trust of smart women and smart men who got together and said, let's intelligently design a retirement program that is superior to pensions, that will give you more wealth, that will be better for you. Never one time was there a group of minds that got together. It was Richard Stenger trying to fulfill the congressman. They didn't even think it was going to be anything. And then it was Ted Benna trying to help Cheltenham Bank give executive bonuses tax deferral. So this was not an intelligently designed apparatus to transport you to retirement. This is haplessly evolved as an organism that has become a beast. It is a cancer. It is a organism that is mutating rather than being designed. That's important to know. Now, one little tidbit before maybe you cut me off and go to break, but I warned you, you get me going on this because I know this stuff, man. There's nothing in my adult life I have studied more than this. The research, the interview, these hours, the digging, all of it. So before Conable passed in year 2000, he had a visit in the year 2000 by a biographer, James Fleming, not James Bond. But James Fleming goes to his home and he interviews Conable, and he says this. He says, tell me about 401k. He says, it's really interesting. After first thing, he wrote a book. 10 years after he retired as a congressman, he wrote a book called Congress and the Tax Law. And it was a collection of speeches he'd given on how to create tax law. And I thought, when I wrote 401k, my wife was honest with me. She goes, Andy, no one is really thinking, tonight I'll curl up by the fire and read a book on 401ks. But the fact Conable wrote a book on Congress and the tax law, that gave me a little more confidence. Because let me tell you, I have a copy of it, and it is not a page turner. It selects his most important speeches over his career. There's not a single mention of 401k. The most resultant legislation of his career doesn't even get a mention in his magnum opus. Doesn't even get a hint of a mention. So he publishes that book, no mention. 20 years goes by, and we go from zero to $1 trillion in 401ks. Today, there's 11 trillion in the United States. But at this point, 20 years into this 40-year experiment, there's $1 trillion in 401k. And he gets nominated, get this, by Pension and Investments magazine. They nominate Barbara Conable as Man of the Century. He gets a nomination as Man of the Century for having brought to us the masses, the 401k revolution. He goes to a meeting with some colleagues, and they start patting him on the back, say, Conable, look at this, is amazing. You're Man of the Century nominee here. He goes, there's got to be some mistake, man. I have no recollection of this. I am absolutely sure I had nothing to do with it. I don't even know what a 401k is. He calls up the House Ways and Means Committee, of which he used to be the chair, and he says, did I have anything to do with 401k? And they say, you had Richard Stenger write it. You sponsored the legislation, sir. And he had no idea. And he said, I had thought all of the legislation I'd ever done really had no effect on my career. And he said, quote, it was totally inadvertent on my part, unquote. So everyone is in a system that is a freaking accident that was it's called off-label use. They found this little 800-word legislation, created a loophole for Xerox and Kodak, and then Ted Bennett takes it and tries to use it on Cheltenham Bank. And the next thing you know, what it did is it changed the function. And we can segue into the next part here. It changed the cash flow pattern completely. And no one saw it because we don't teach this in school. The cash flow pattern before and the cash flow pattern after, it's astounding to study. And if you understand financial statements and you read Rich Dad Poor Dad and you know how to track money through a financial statement, it is a cancer. It is a colossal robbery and tyranny, to use the late John Bogle from Vanguard's terms. Robbery and tyranny is what this has become, and we can continue that in the next segment. So I apologize for the length, but I did, this is my deal, dude. This is something I know.
I feel that, but yes, let's take a break. I don't want to stop this momentum because I love where we're going with this. Listeners, if you ever questioned your 401k, you're not alone. And
if you didn't feel something was right, we've got to do something. So when we come back, Andy's going to break down
part 2 of this. I'm so excited for this. I hope you are too. And don't forget to go to stockcastbonus.com. Download your free resources if you want to build a plan based on knowledge instead of just whatever this monstrosity is. That's where you start right there. Go to stockcastbonus.com. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And like, they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad Stockcast. All right, Andy, let's get into it. All right, we've got some context here. This kind of happened, I don't want to say by accident, kind of by accident. It's people at the wings created this. Maybe some investors going on some laws that, hey, I see an opportunity here to make a whole bunch of money. Where do we go, part 2?
So, if you had a little snow globe, we just finished the holidays, and you have a little snow globe, and you look inside at little characters at Christmas and the snow, let's create a 401k snow globe and look in it. A little snow globe with the players. You've got the government inside there. You've got the worker that's putting money in it. You've got the corporation that is sponsoring it. And then you have Wall Street, which is running it. And so 4 players. So what you really ought to say is there's a certain amount of money that is put into a 401k. Where does it go? And how does this benefit or to the detriment of each one? Well, first, look at your financial statement and how you interact with your company. If you look at the financial statement cash flow pattern of a pension, you have a liability, like Studebaker had, that becomes an expense to a company to pay you for the rest of your life, and you're not working. So if you're a corporation, you look at this huge liability on your sheet, and by the way, this is why Detroit went bankrupt. This is why San Bernardino went bankrupt. This is why CalPERS is going bankrupt. This is why Oklahoma is going bankrupt in their school system, because they have these promises. Hostess went bankrupt. United Airlines went bankrupt. GM went bankrupt. And they all say the reason we're going bankrupt is we're paying people that don't work. The United States is going bankrupt because a third of our budget, well, 2/3 of our budget, is called income security. It's pensions, Social Security, Medicare, medical dependents. So the idea of paying people for not working at the government level, municipal level, state level, corporate level, it does not work. It doesn't work long term. So you make all these promises.
And I think it's also probably good to say when pensions were created, our life expectancy was pretty short then too.
The first pension was the American Express company. They weren't a credit card company. They were like UPS, American Express, Federal Express, right? They had a rail system. Their first pension was granted after 20 years of service at age 60. If you look at the actuarial tables of 1875, when that was put out there, the life expectancy of someone who reached 20 was exactly 60. So on average, they would never have to pay the pension on average. And that's called actuarial analysis. By the way, instantly enough, Ted Benna, before he started work at Johnson Benna, he was an actuary. And when he pitched the idea to Children's Bank, what did he say? Only 1% of payroll. Why? Well, we have the numbers on breakage of how many people would participate, just like American Express knew how many would participate in the promises. So, I go into this in great detail in the book and the dates. And it's all, I know this stuff, man. This is this is my wheelhouse. I'm confident here. So anyway, if you look at the opportunity from a corporation to say, when you leave, snip, you're done. You have your mutual funds, and you and Wall Street are now we have no more liability. Beautiful. So it's a huge benefit to the corporation to say, rather than a guaranteed lifetime income the rest of your life, where they have to manage the fund, they have to manage the risk, they have to manage the income, they have to manage the up and downs. Now it's your responsibility as a worker who has never been trained in the stock market investments. If you read Benjamin Graham stuff and you read securities analysis, Warren Buffett's hero, his main mentor, and you read that thick book, securities analysis, 90% of it's on bonds. There's only one chapter on stocks. Why? Because you were out of your mind to put your future in stocks because it was so risky. You were out of your freaking mind to do that back then. Now, throw it in a 401k. Everybody does it, right? So that's the relationship there. Now, think about your relationship with Wall Street. The key word on Wall Street, the phrase is assets under management. That is the term. They're not interested in growing wealth. They're interested in assets under management to collect fees. John Bogle, the late John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, in his book, The Battle for the Soul of Capitalism, uses the following about 2.5% after all the hidden fees and different fees go in. That puts a headwind. So think about this. There's a story in the Bible of a man who sells his birthright for a mess of pottage. He gives up eternity for something right now. He gives up his lineage, his legacy, the wealth that would be inherited for a one-time food. And that's bait. It concealed a hook. He had to give up so much to get something now. So when people say, hey, they matched me $1, I earn $1, they put $1 in, that's 100%. That's one time up front. That's it. The compounding now gets a headwind of Wall Street. Well, if you do the math, if you take, I don't know, $1,000 and you compound it from age 20 to where you die at 85 and you get 8%, that's $148,000 without even adding to it. So for every $1,000 you invest at age 20, that's 140 grand by the time you die. That's the compounding power of Wall Street, or not Wall Street, of the market. If you take 2.5% of that in fees out, that goes from $148,000 to $32,000. So there's your hook. You're giving up $110,000 by taking that employee match up front. $110,000. And guess where the money goes? Because the market does give 8% now, doesn't it? So guess who takes that $110,000? They take those fees and compound them at the full 8%, and they get the 110. It's actually 116 if you add it up. Want to be belligerent about it. So Wall Street takes, even if you're at an expense ratio of a fraction of a percent, like 0.5, over a lifetime, that's 25% of the money. Because you're biting on the hook of the employee match. You're not looking beyond it. And on your statement, it doesn't even show expense ratios. It just shows the result of the mutual fund's performance. All the expenses are deducted out of that before you see performance on a statement, so you never see them. You'll see some expenses like, well, what is the statement fee? Or, there'll be a few expenses on there, but the real expenses taken from the mutual funds you never see on your statement because they're deducted before that number even gets printed on the paper. They're already automatically deducted. So you don't even know how much you're paying or losing by giving Wall Street their share. So whether it's 0.5% or 2.5 like Bogle cites, it's anywhere from 80% of the money they take down to around 20% of the money. For doing what? For mimicking the market. And this is why, if you go to the SPIVA report, S&P 500 versus actively managed fund, that is why 90% of them fail to beat the S&P 500. The reason they can't is they're mimicking the S&P minus a fee, which is why they can't ever beat it. And the longer out in time you go, the worse their performance is because of the compounding costs of fees. That 90% number is just a 15-year number. It's not a lifetime number. So people need to understand a couple of things. To answer your broad question, what do people not know about 401ks that they should? Number one, they should know the origin. They should know that this was Richard Stanger, Conable Barber, Ted Benna, the Studebaker catastrophe, the United Auto Worker Union. This evolved with a bunch of personal interest as a beast, not as a design plan like we do with our wealth blueprint calculator, right? We design plans here. Most people participate in a plan that was never designed. In fact, if I ask you, what's your 401k going to look like when you retire? if you're 20 years from that, your answer is, I have no idea. Well, okay. So how do you know if it's going to work? And wouldn't you, if you're going to do a deal with someone, like if you're going to go to work, wouldn't you want to know what you're getting paid before you participate? Wouldn't you want to kind of know what the number would be? Like if I'm going to work for a month, what am I going to get at the end of it? But with your retirement, you're not asking that question. You're not asking, well, it might be this, it might be this. But if you look at Vanguard's How America Saves Today, you bring out this year's, which would be 2024 numbers, because they haven't got the 2025 numbers crunched yet. Height of the market, mind you, it's about $90,000 per person, 55 to 64. They got less than 100 grand in their 401k. That doesn't last me 3 months, right? Or whatever, and it's not going to last people anything. Who can live on 100 grand a year? Right? That would last nothing in a person's lifestyle. So anyway, that's something to think about too, is the history of it. Then you look at what it currently bleeds, and the opportunity to become an investor that robs you of, the opportunity to learn about investing it robs you of, the Wall Street coffers, and you never get to find out what you really could have become by saying, I'm not going to pay those fees. I'm going to keep them and bump my rate of return just by eliminating them. And that's why Robert Kiyosaki in the foreword that he wrote, he was very kind to write the foreword of 401k, says, the reason I didn't have a 401k is I didn't need one. I could do it myself. I don't need Wall Street. Buffett doesn't use Wall Street. There's no connection. He lives in Omaha, Nebraska. He doesn't pay fees. He buys his own stuff. Buffett said it. He said, quote, 1% is enormous, unquote, because he knows, like John Bogle says, 5%, 2.5%, it's hundreds of thousands. Actually, off every thousand, it's tens of thousands, 100,000. If you want to go to 10,000, now you're in the millions that you lose. Now you're in the millions that Wall Street takes. And that's why, don't you think there's a reason they dangle that employee match? I mean, can't you see that? Is that out of the goodness of their heart? Are you working for the Red Cross? Is that it? That out of the goodness of their heart, they're just saying, here's this employee match? Or do you think that it is a lure to incentivize your participation because they want you in there? They need you in there.
That is definitely.
Is it charity? Oh, here, we'll match you 100% because we just love you so much. Come on.
All right. So
come on.
I'd probably say, with rightfully so, we're all probably a little agitated as we listen to the truth of 401ks. Now, the question I think on everybody's mind is this. If someone has most of their wealth tied up in the 401ks, they just didn't know better. It's not their fault. That's what it was at the time. But moving forward, now it's your fault to make an action. So what's one smart step that someone can take to get educated and stop the madness?
Okay, so that's a solution question, right? What can I do to solve this? In our previous podcast, I made a reference to a quote that I really like. I should give reference to the guy who quoted it, and I don't remember his or her name. I think it was maybe John Dewey. That comes to mind. I'm getting older. I don't remember. It's funny. I can remember that ERISA was in 1974, and I can remember that the first pension was American Express in 1875, and I can't remember if John Dewey said this or not. I think it was John Dewey who said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So if you want to ask me how to solve this, let's see if we can state the problem well. Why do people put their money in 401k? I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to invest. If they knew how to do it for themselves, they would clearly do it themselves. Clearly. And so the problem is not 401ks. The problem is we don't know how to invest. That cash flow pattern of a pension is a function of the income statement. A 401k is a function of the balance sheet. Think about, that's not a small thing. If you ask someone about their pension, they will give you an answer in dollars per month. Oh, I get $3,000 a month from my pension. If you ask someone about their 401k, they will give you a solitary number related to net worth. Oh, I have $80,000 in my 401k. Think about the difference between those two answers. $3,000 a month for the rest of my life, $80,000 is an hourglass risk that goes up and down as the market flows. So that switch from pensions to a 401k fundamentally changed the cash flow pattern from a function of the income statement to a function of the balance sheet. And people just said, oh, okay, whatever, man. They didn't understand. The lack of financial education to see that change is blatant, or they would have never have gone for it. They never would have traded a cash flow situation for a net worth risk management hourglass problem. They never would have done it. It speaks against everything from inflation to taxation to everything you would know about wealth building. It's fatal. So a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And the reason people are involved in 401ks is very simple. Why do we need Wall Street? Why do we use them? Because they claim you can't do it yourself. That's their claim. That's assets. Why do you need them to manage your assets? Why do we pay them a fee to manage your assets when all they really do is diversify you anyway, right? They put you in a fund that mimics the market anyway and charge a fee. The problem is that people don't know how to invest. And that's why I align myself with the Rich Dad mission of elevating well-being, elevating the well-being of humanity through financial education. Because the first step is to get smarter. If the problem is a lack of education, then the solution is let's get smarter, let's get educated, and let's free ourselves from the bondage of needing Wall Street, or the perception of needing Wall Street. Because as Robert aptly stated in his foreword, Buffett doesn't have a 401k. Why? Because he doesn't need one. He knows how to invest. Robert Kiyosaki doesn't have a 401k. He doesn't need one. He knows how to invest, right? I don't have a 401k. I don't need one or want one. I want to continue to learn more and more about investing. So the first step is knowledge. But it's not about what do I do. It's who I become. What do I do? Do I quit contributing? Well, now you're just going from the frying pan in the fire if you don't know how to invest. See how subtle that is? The problem is not the 401k. Leaving a 401k doesn't solve the problem, because you're still left with not knowing how to invest. So understanding that problem, if a person doesn't have the money that they want to have in their life, it is a function of personal development. Either there's something they don't know, or they know it and they don't do it, which is a discipline issue, or their temperament is off, or whatever it is. If a person doesn't have the wealth they want, it is a function of some type of opportunity in personal development yet to be seized. So there you go. That's a long segment and a long thing, but I warned you. I care about it because I don't like the idea of people participating in organizations, giving money to organizations that they don't understand what's really going on behind the scenes. And that gets me going. Just like I want to tackle that guy, fighting one of our peace officers. I want to tackle this ignorance problem. And I should not care. I should look, if people want to get in a 401k, what do I care? I don't know why I care. I probably shouldn't. But I think people should learn about it and do something about it. But that's just my opinion.
Well, thank you for sharing your opinion, and I know it's been enlightening for me. I remember, in my early 20s thinking 401ks were good when I was first getting in the stock market, and then I listened and learned from you, and then my eyes were open, so to speak. And I think it would be a disservice if you didn't share that. That's for sure. I think we all need that. So let's do this. Let's wrap up. Listeners, the biggest danger and investing isn't risk. It's just blind trust. It's not knowing what to do next. And when it comes to 401ks, most people never question the plan until they're already locked in. Andy, big thank you to you for just pulling back the curtain today. This was so helpful for all of us. And listener, if you want to understand your money, your options, your future more, go to stockcastbonus.com right now. Go there right now. You'll find free tools, education to help you think beyond the defaults and just to build a smarter strategy. And if this episode challenged your thinking, make sure you like it, subscribe, share it with someone who's counting on a 401k and hasn't looked under the hood yet. You're not here by accident. You're building something that most people won't. So stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Del.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.